Richard Hayes had everything: a mansion overlooking the ocean, a collection of rare cars, and a business empire worth more than most people could imagine. But despite all his wealth, Richard lived with one constant fear: everyone was out to take something from him. So when he hired a new maid, a quiet woman named Elena who always kept her eyes to the floor, he began watching her like a hawk. And one morning, driven by suspicion, he decided to set a trap. He left his giant walk-in safe open, filled with stacks of cash, and waited behind a corner with a hidden camera running. What happened next wasn't what he expected. It wasn't even close. In fact, it would break his heart. And see, before we begin the full story, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment to support true story tales. Your engagement helps us bring more inspiring stories just like this one. Hang his life forever. Richard Hayes wasn't born poor, but he wasn't born wealthy either. He built his fortune from the ground up: years of sleepless nights, risky investments, and a constant fear of losing everything he had worked for. Over time, that fear hardened him. He stopped trusting people, even those closest to him. His wife once told him, "Your money's protecting you from everyone, including love." But Richard brushed it off. He believed caution kept him alive. When she left, he said it didn't bother him. But deep down, the emptiness grew. After his divorce and his kids moving away for college, the mansion felt cold and echoing. He hired staff to keep the place running, but he rarely spoke to them. They were just employees, never friends. And when one of his longtime maids retired, he hired someone new: Elena Ruiz, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and a polite smile that never lasted more than a second. She worked quietly, moved softly, never asked questions, and never touched anything unnecessary. She was the ideal employee, which made Richard even more suspicious. "People like that always have a secret," he muttered one morning while reviewing security footage for the third time that week. "Nobody's that humble without wanting something." And so, the doubt festered. One day, Richard overheard two staff members talking near the kitchen. Elena's name was mentioned. "Her son is still in the hospital," one said. "She's been working extra hours anywhere she can. She barely sleeps," the other added. "Imagine worrying about medical bills like that." Richard paused. He didn't comment. He didn't even let them know he was listening. But later that night, while lying in his massive bedroom with lights dimmed, those words echoed. Her son. Medical bills. Stress. Desperation. For most people, this would stir sympathy. But for Richard? It stirred fear. "Desperate people steal," he whispered to himself. "I need to make sure she's not planning anything." He convinced himself it was a logical step, a responsible action. But deep down, he knew it was something else: his ongoing war with trust. The next morning, as sunlight filled the hallway, Richard opened his walk-in safe. Inside were bundles of cash, jewelry, and important documents. He purposefully left it wide open, almost glowing with temptation. He placed a small hidden camera behind a stack of books on the shelf opposite the safe. Then he pretended to leave the house and waited in the next room, watching everything from his phone. Minutes passed. Nothing. Elena was still cleaning the living room. After half an hour, she finally made her way toward the hallway where the safe room was located. Richard leaned forward, heart pounding. "Here we go," he whispered. Elena stepped inside the room slowly. She didn't gasp. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She simply looked at the open door of the safe, then around the room. Richard's heartbeat grew louder. "Come on, show your real intentions." But what Elena did next caught him completely off guard. She didn't touch the money. She didn't touch anything. Instead, she walked to the safe, placed her hand on the heavy steel door, and gently pushed it shut. Then she clicked the lock into place. Richard's mouth fell open. Elena then pressed her palms together, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Please, God, protect me from temptation. Help me stay strong, for my son." She wiped a tear from her cheek, and walked out of the room. Richard slowly lowered his phone, stunned into silence. His trap had not exposed greed. It had exposed faith. And heartbreak.
That evening, guilt gnawed at him. Elena had never done anything wrong.
She worked hard, kept to herself, and carried pain he had never even bothered to ask about. Yet he treated her like a criminal. The next morning, Richard waited in the kitchen. Elena arrived early as usual, tying her hair back and preparing for another day of work. When she saw Richard standing there, she froze. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said softly.
"Please," he replied, "sit for a moment."
She hesitated. No employee ever sat with him, but slowly lowered herself into a chair.
Richard cleared his throat. "I want to apologize." Elena's eyebrows lifted slightly. She wasn't used to apology from people like him. "I shouldn't have doubted your honesty," he continued. "I left the safe open yesterday. I was testing you." His voice cracked. "And I'm ashamed of myself." Elena looked down at her hands. "You don't need to apologize, sir. I understand. People do what they think they must. But you didn't do what most people would," he said. "You closed it. You protected it. Even though you're dealing with so much."
Her eyes glistened, but she stayed quiet.
Richard finally asked, "How is your son?" That was all it took. Elena exhaled shakily.
"He's fighting," she whispered. "He has a rare condition.
The treatments are expensive.
I'm behind on bills.
But I keep praying. I keep working. That's all I can do."
Her voice broke. She covered her face as silent tears slipped through her fingers. Richard felt something heavy shifting inside him, something he had locked away for years.
Compassion.
After a long pause, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I want you to take this," he said gently.
"No, sir, It's not charity."
He pushed the envelope toward her.
"It's gratitude. You reminded me today that there are still good people in this world." Elena opened the envelope with shaking hands.
Inside was a check for $80,000, enough to cover her son's medical treatments for an entire year.
Her breath caught.
She tried to stand, but her knees gave out, and she sank back into the chair, sobbing.
"Mr. Hayes. I can't accept this."
"Yes, you can," he said softly.
"Please. Let me do one kind thing in my life that actually matters."
She covered her mouth as the tears flowed freely. Richard walked around the table, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "Your honesty is worth more than all the money in that safe."
From that day on, everything changed.
Elena continued working at the mansion, but now she walked with a lighter step. She often brought Richard homemade lunch, insisting he try new dishes. She told him stories about her childhood, about her son's progress, and occasionally teased him about his stern expressions.
In return, Richard opened up too.
He told her about his divorce, his regrets, and how wealth had turned into a prison he didn't even realize he was living in. Slowly, friendship bloomed, unexpected but genuine. And just months later, when Elena's son recovered enough to visit the mansion and personally thank Richard, the millionaire found himself crying again. But this time, the tears weren't from guilt. They were from joy. Richard learned something that most people take a lifetime to understand.
Kindness isn't a weakness.
It's the greatest form of strength. It can break down walls built from fear, soften hearts hardened by pain, and remind us that behind every face is a story we know nothing about. And sometimes, the people we suspect the most are the ones who teach us how to be human again. So today, wherever you are, choose kindness. You never know whose life and whose heart you might change.